Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. So if you were walking across, if you were walking on a tightrope and the distance between you and the ground was 1 foot, 2 feet, 100 feet, 1,000 feet, should you be looking at the distance below you that you could fall to, or should you be looking at the tightrope? Right? When circumstances are difficult, it's important to know where we need to put our attention. It's important to know where to put our attention all the time. But sometimes the stakes are clearly high. They're always high. Because every mind moment that we have is a springboard to the next mind moment, which is a springboard to the next mind moment. So the stakes are always high. But if you're walking on a tightrope, it's easier to see it. So the story is actually one out of Tibet that I'm told. I read it some years ago. It's one of my all-time favorite stories. It's from centuries ago. And I don't take it so much as a true story, as a fable, but who knows. There was once an old weaver. He was a man who had started off very poor. He'd worked hard at being a weaver, making cloth. And he created a cloth empire. And he became extraordinarily wealthy. He owned all the land around. And his house was a mansion. And he had about 10 sons and daughters, and they were all set up in mansions all up and down that same road. And of course, there were lots of other people living in there, in houses that he would have owned, all up and down that road. Supremely wealthy man of the whole land, the whole area. And he retired, and the years went by, and he got all of his sons and daughters married off to people of suitable rank, and they settled down around in the area by. And the wife died, and when his wife had died and he was retired, these are the golden years, and his children pestered him, come on, just turn over everything to us, and we can make good use of it while we're still relevant. And he thought that was a good idea, so he gave away everything. And his eldest son took the mansion he'd been living in, and then he was living in a smaller room in his former mansion. And the sons and daughters all made an agreement that he would rotate among them. Well, it seems like hardly any time passed at all before his daughter-in-law of the eldest son was saying, doesn't father have somewhere else to live? So he shuffled down the road to the next son's house. Hardly any time at all passed before that daughter-in-law was like, I think there are other children of this family, don't you suppose? So he shuffled down the road to the next in line, his daughter, eldest daughter, and pretty soon he was shuffling down the road again. And he became rather nomadic, going from house to house, never really welcomed, actually. You see, he had put everything into building up his financial empire. providing for this family. But it was all materialism. And his whole family took their cues from him. They were supremely materialistic people. Frankly, they were busy, important people, and they didn't have time for an old man to hang around and gab at them and try to relive the old days. They're like, okay, Dad, time to move on. And so move on he did. And pretty soon the people who lived in the area would see him shuffling down the road, and they would laugh at him. They'd say, oh, you know, the wealthy man, what good is his wealth now? You know, he's too old to have any fun. And look at him shuffle along. And this went on. And the sons and daughters started to feel kind of embarrassed at the spectacle of elderly father shuffling down the road again. So they had a meeting, what to do about father. And they didn't consult him. They just had a meeting about him, and they decided that he would live at the elder son's house. In fact, so he wouldn't be too bothered. He and his wife wouldn't be too bothered by father. They decided to set up a cottage in the back where father could live, and everyone would rotate taking the food to him, so he wouldn't be too much bother to anybody. And that's what they did. They created a little cottage in the back, a very poorly appointed cottage, frankly, drafty and not at all like the wealth and riches that he'd become accustomed to. But that's where they put him. And day by day, it would fall to the women of the family to bring him his food. But of course, those who didn't have the cottage in the back tended to forget, and so it keeps falling on the eldest son's wife. So she keeps doing it, and she lets him know each time what an annoyance it is. She brings in the food, and she leaves. And that's his life. In the back, in the cottage. And he sits there thinking of the days gone by when he was a big, important man, commanding so many workers, so incredibly wealthy, with the respect of his family and the love of his wife. And he'd cry and cry and cry. And more years went by in this pitiful condition. One day, a Buddhist monk came on his begging rounds. The eldest son invited him in and was very impressed with him, and invited all the family to come, hear this monk's teachings. Late into the afternoon and deep into the evening, this monk teaches with the whole family gathered, just rapt. And when it was deep in the night and it was time for the monk and everyone to retire, so the others are going to their homes, and the son said, please, welcome to stay in a room here. And he goes, well, I don't stay in lay people's homes. The son said, okay, well, we'll set up something comfortable for you in the back courtyard. And the monk said, okay. So they just, threw something together for him to sleep in that night. And the old man didn't know what the commotion was, why everyone had gathered, or what the commotion was, in the courtyard, and pride and fear kept him in his cottage. When everything had died down, he kind of crept out to see what had happened, what was going on, and he finds this monk. So he talks to the monk, and the monk says, oh, who are you? And he says, I am the patriarch of this place. All these lands, all of these children, these people that you met, they're all my children and my grandchildren. And look what they've done to me. They've put me in this back cottage to forget. And the monk, he really felt it. Wow, this is a terrible situation for a man to be in. And so the old man complained to him with tears, oh, look what they've done to me. Look how they've treated me. I have nothing but my memories and my tears. And the monk wanted to help him. So he thought, okay, how am I going to wake this guy up? And so he feigned fierceness with the old man. He said, but it is your own doing. I said, what? Why do you say that? It is your own doing. All those years, you built up only material goods. You did nothing for your spiritual life. You did nothing for spiritual considerations. What did you give in charity? What did you do to develop yourself? Did you keep the moon days? Did you do anything for your religion? What did you do all those years? The old man said, I built up nothing but material things. I built up nothing for old age. I built nothing for the next life. And the old man was very shocked to think of it, because he never blamed himself. He just thought the kids were selfish and cruel. But he sees now that they just took their cues from him. He taught them materialism and materialistic values, and they just ran with it. There was no spiritual considerations, no deep concerns of the heart, no ethics. He just made money, worked day in and day out for more and more and more. He saw it very clearly now. And he said to the monk, you're right. This is all my own doing. It's too late now. I'm so old. He said to the monk, you know, what I really need is a remedy for old age and death. And the monk said, that I have. You do? He does. Through the whole night, the monk taught the old man. And the story that's come down doesn't detail what the monk taught the old man. But I imagine he would have started with the Brahma Viharas. And then about how to meditate for insight. And then he would have hit him with the Four Noble Truths. I would imagine something like that. The Brahma Viharas are 4 states, uplifting states, that are so powerful they can overcome almost any unwholesome state. Loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, joy at what others have instead of envy, which is mudita, and equanimity, even keel, even balance, not ups and downs, upekkha. Those are the 4 Brahma Viharas, and if you can cultivate any one of them, you can overcome any unwholesome state. In fact, if you cultivate any wholesome state, it immediately supplants any unwholesome states. But these 4 are the ones that are like, not a crowbar, what is it when you can take a bar and push down on it, and a lever? They're like a lever that kind of pushes out unwholesome states with particular potency. So that's why I think he would have taught that to the old man first. And then he would have taught him how to make the mind very still, very quiet, using that or maybe some other method. And then he would have taught him how to see how everything is changing. You know, once the mind is so clear and bright, to see everything arising and passing. See how it's just completely unstable, down to the smallest little filament of existence, all the way to the biggest mountain. You know, it's all changing, changing, changing. So even just the slightest little touch of the breath at the nose, or the slightest little mind movement, we can see, oh, it's change, change, change. And there's nothing persisting in between. There's just the change. The change. Arise and pass, arise and pass. So he might have taught him something like that. And then, of course, he would have probably hit him with the Four Noble Truths about where suffering really comes from. Suffering doesn't come from the elder tossing you into a cottage in the backyard. That's not where suffering comes from. Suffering comes from the wounded heart. Suffering comes from the desire. Suffering comes from not pleasantness and unpleasantness and neutrality, but from all the opinions we have about these things, liking, disliking, confusion that this is just how I am in the neutral space. He would have taught him that there is suffering, there is a cause to the suffering, and it's not found in the outer world, that there is cessation to suffering here and now to be found. Here and now. It's already here. You just have to find it. Or rather, find what isn't that freedom and get it out of the way. find the obstacles and get them out of the way, because the freedom is the default once we get rid of all the obstacles. You don't have to become a bigger, better you to have the freedom. You just have to get rid of the obstacles between here and there. Like, or if there's already here, you have to just get rid of that veil of the darkness between oneself and that state of freedom. So you don't have to become a bigger, better you. You just have to dismantle what isn't enlightenment. You have to dismantle the causes. You have to dismantle unenlightening activities of the mind. And then when we dismantle the habits of unenlightening, then what the default there is the enlightenment, the freedom, the peace. He taught him all during the night, and in the morning the monk left. When the daughter-in-law brought the food in to the old man and reminded him of what a burden he is, with her lips pursed and dirty glance, he didn't really pay attention this time, and it didn't stab him in the heart, because he had some work to do. As soon as his meal was done, he wanted to get straight to work and start doing these meditation practices and these insights, and wow, could hardly wait. And he got right on it. And he became very, very, very skilled in loving kindness in particular. His metta was so powerful. Over the time, more years went by. And the daughter-in-law would come in with her, bringing in the clatter and clanging of setting things down and unmindfully, and just making some little unpleasant comments, or not even just looking, just set it down and go. She's busy, she's important, she's better things to do than this, deal with that father. And he just looks at her with forgiveness and understanding. Time has gone by. He has transformed. And the daughter-in-law is so blind with materialistic values, she doesn't even see it. But one day something happened. There was some kind of traditional festival where the whole family gathers and, has a feast and remembers the ancestors and all that. Late in the night, the daughter-in-law, she didn't even feed father all day, much less invite him to be a guest of honor or anything. So she's feeling guilty, which makes her particularly, ill-tempered. So she goes to the leftover feast and she throws some things together and she wraps it up in a banana leaf or something, and she hurries out the door and stops because something's weird. The cottage is lit up. They didn't give him that many candles. First she thought it was on fire, but it's not on fire. But every crack and crevice is emanating light. She's terrified. With goosebumps, she goes very close and she peers in the window. Inside, there are angelic beings paying homage to the old man. She runs back to the house, sobbing and blabbering something about demons eating him. And so the whole family is in trauma, like, what? What's going on? So with great effort, they managed to force all the children to stay back. And the adults link arms in terror as they creep towards the terrifying lit up cottage, and they see something. Oh, they don't know what to make of it. And they run back to the house and they shiver and they make tea and they talk in soft sounds all night. They're so terrified. And in the morning, as soon as daylight breaks, they have more courage. They're going to approach that cottage again. They pull themselves together. Okay, the daughter-in-law, to save face, just in case, she pulls together something for breakfast. And with her in the lead, they all head off to that cottage. And she knocks on the door because they think he's probably a skeleton, but they don't know. And he, in a cheerful voice, he invites her in. And she Opens the door, and there she's sitting there like normal. Hi, Father. And he goes, oh, well, look. Well, looks like everyone's here. Hello. And they all tiptoe in, and they're looking and looking and looking. They can't see anything unusual. And she goes, here's your breakfast. And he goes, well, thank you, but what's the occasion? And she goes, oh, well, we'd all just wanted to say hello. And we had the festival yesterday. We just want to say hi, Father. And he goes, oh, hi. Well, that's very nice. Okay, well, you can go. And now they're really shocked because he was so clingy before, but now he just is bright and smiling. His eyes are very bright. And he says, they can go. And they're like, okay, let me go. Well, they made a pact not to talk about it, but you can't stop the servants. And they saw everything. They know something really, really bizarre happened that terrified the family. And the word was among the whole neighborhood, minutes after dawn. Like it spreads fast. Well, the neighbors want to know what happened. So in ones and twos, they just find some reason to come and knock on the cottage door and see what's happening. Well, nothing's happening, but the old man is sitting there in a room that feels like itself, the room, the piece is tangible, and their hearts just find this place of comfort as soon as they walk in. And they say, well, can we just sit and talk with you? And he said, well, I'm not really much for talking, but you are welcome to sit with me. And so they just sit while he just sits there and does his meditation. And their cares drop away, and they remember their religion, and they feel uplifted. And sometimes they kind of bow to him before they leave. And they go, and they tell others, you should visit him. This is sweet. It's lovely. And more people are just, there's a crowd around him day by day, but he won't talk to them. He did not learn the teachings in a way to pass them on to others verbally. But he just does his thing, and they're drawn. And the word spreads all through the region that there's a master, a great being, a lovely person. And people come from near and far to just sit with him and feel comforted. Sometimes they have tears, but the tears are gone by the time they leave. And more years go by. He is in very ancient old age when finally he passes away. But before he passed away, probably the very last of people to go in there was the daughter-in-law. And finally she saw the goodness and beauty of the old man. And she too joined the people sitting. And she too dropped all of these material concerns because it was so much nicer to be quiet and not be busy. And then in that quiet place, empathy could arise. And she started using her wealth to help the people too. So did all the rest of the family. They changed. Not 100%, but they changed. And when he passed, the entire region went into mourning. The funeral was enormous, and no one was more grief-stricken at losing the old man than who? The oldest son's wife, the daughter-in-law. My mind has gone back to the story again and again in times when I feel helpless or like there's no meaning. Many years ago, I was in the hospital with cancer, and I heard about a woman in the intensive care who was there permanently. I mean, as permanent as things are, she was in a condition she would never be able to leave. She had learned the birthdays of all the workers, and whenever their birthday came, she would have a gift and a card given to them. She was finding meaning even there by thinking with love and generosity and kindness. I've always been struck by that. There's no guarantee that we're going to live in a way like this. There's a very tragic story I heard of. There was a Buddhist conference once. A hospice nurse told of this woman that she'd been the nurse for, who had gone into hospice care, weeping and bitter because here it was. She was a young woman dying, and she's dying without a partner. And she thought, if only I had a partner to share my life with, then I'd be happy. I'd be okay with dying. I'd be all right. I could be happy if only there was a man by my side, someone to love me. But there wasn't, and she was miserable. And then her disease progressed, and she could not walk around as she had before. She had found some comfort in walking around. And now she was in the wheelchair, lamenting, if only I could walk, then I would be happy. And then she lost the ability to do for herself in the wheelchair. So she was in bed. And she said, I used to be able to get out and get around and meet with people and do things. And now I'm just stuck in this bed. If only I could get out and walk out in the wheelchair, I would be happy. And then she lost the ability to read. And she said, reading was such a comfort to me. If only I could read, I would be happy. And she lost the ability to feed herself. If only she could feed herself, she would be happy. She lost the ability to do things with her hands. If only she could use her hands, she would be happy. She lost the ability to speak clearly. And people were really like struggling to hear what she was trying to say. And the last clear thing she said, one of the last clear things she said was, if only she could speak, she would be happy. But the nurse was pretty sure that her last thoughts included, if only she could live, she would be happy as she died. I've probably added a bit to the story, but it's such a sobering story. Wishing and wanting what we don't have is not the way to happiness, ever. But going back to that tightrope that I was talking about earlier, if you just look at where you could fall down to, the mind can seize on that and become paralyzed or careless. It can be very hazardous even, but if you just put your mind on where your feet should go, you'll be all right. So you're never useless. Your life is never useless. You always have the capacity to love, the capacity to make good use of your time. Even if you're just an old man sitting in a cottage alone, you could change the world. And you certainly can change your world, and you can change your world permanently just by putting into practice what the Buddha taught us. So that is the fable that I wanted to share with you tonight for your uplift and for your happiness.